Dave, feeling like a child, carefully placed folders filled with documents into his luxurious leather briefcase. He was in a really good mood because today was one of those days when you wake up and just feel fresh. He had a light breakfast, omelette, and orange juice. He put on his best suit for today's occasion. It was an important day for his business career. After all these years doing his construction business alone, he finally found the right person to partner up with. He was really pleased and happy that fate had brought him Tom as a business partner. He couldn't have imagined a better collaborator. Tom was the kind of guy who had been doing business in various fields. He had a lot of connections, both among business people and other influential people. He was the perfect person to take on board for Dave. Tom was also extremely capable in handling business matters, and their partnership in construction had led to a significant increase in their annual income. Building his business from the ground up, Dave had to go through a lot of hardships. Last couple of years, he began delegating much more and had reached a point in his life where he could afford more time for himself. As he started having more free time, he began contemplating the idea of starting a family. After all, he was over 35 and didn't want to become an older father. He wanted to be able to witness his children grow up and go out into the world. Dave also wanted to experience what it was like to have grandchildren and see them go through life. Of course, as a businessman, he had a lot of plans. He wasn't like many of his close friends who didn't want to miss out on the fun of their youth. He didn't want to regret not having kids when he's old and gray. On the other hand, Dave didn't have any specific person in mind as a potential partner. He hadn't been in a relationship for a long time. In the past, he had been through several potential candidates and even put them through tests to gauge their feelings for him. However, the women always failed these tests spectacularly, making it clear that they were only interested in his money. Dave wanted a modest and respectable woman who would be interested in building a home and kindling a loving relationship with him, but it was difficult to find such a woman with genuine passion, particularly among high society. Ladies in high society were often cunning, more concerned with keeping up with their friends' expenses, such as making sure their hairdresses is not cheaper than their neighbors. It was hard to see through them and figure out those who had genuine feelings. Dave, despite his recent success, did not even hire a housekeeper for himself, preferring to run the household on his own. He came from a humble background where they did not shy away from hard work, but rather enjoyed it. As he thought about his daily life, he gathered all of his paperwork and finally left his apartment. As he exited the building, he glanced up at the windows of his luxurious 4-bedroom apartment on the top floor. It was pleasing to the eye, and there was also a sleek car parked in the lot. As he walked towards this car, he suddenly felt a light touch on his arm. He turned around and saw a poorly dressed girl around 8 years old. Her appearance made it clear that she was a typical beggar. Dave was expecting to hear a request for money, but instead, the girl said something that made him sit down on a bench and think deeply. One thing was certain. After this encounter, he was not going to the meeting with Tom. Years prior to these events, Dave was in a similarly good mood. He was much younger then, and his life was vastly different from his present situation. However, this did not dampen his spirits, even though he was not fabulously wealthy. He lived with his mother in a cramped small apartment and worked as an ordinary programmer in a small computer company. But at the same time, he had a much greater and more valuable happiness in life. His beloved girlfriend Stacy, to whom he had already proposed. They just needed to set a wedding date. Dave and Stacy were going for a walk along the riverbank in one of the parks of a small town nestled among mountains. The town was incredibly beautiful, but it was not often visited by tourists and job opportunities were limited. Stacy was unable to find work there as well, even after graduating from Pedagogical University. She had been living with her grandmother for a long time on her pension. The girl was hesitant to rely on her grandmother's limited income and wanted to start a new life with her boyfriend in better conditions, so she agreed to move to the big city after their wedding. However, she was unaware of the obstacle that would come with this decision: her grandmother, Judy. At 80 years old, she deeply cared for her granddaughter and wanted her to have the best, but she had doubts about her future with her boyfriend, Dave. She didn't trust him to be a dependable and protective partner for her granddaughter due to his past issues with the law and his erratic behavior during his youth. Despite turning his life around and becoming successful, Dave couldn't shake off his past mistakes. He realized that people judged him based on his past, and he couldn't change that. Even though he had changed and become a responsible, hardworking person, the old woman believed that once a lawbreaker, always a lawbreaker, and she shared this opinion with her granddaughter repeatedly. "Stacy, you're going to regret being with this guy. Dump him before it's too late. There's so many good, hard-working men out there who would treat you right. But instead you're sticking with Dave like he's coated in honey." "Oh, Grandma, please stop talking like that. Dave loves me and I love him. He's changed, and what happened in his past is behind him," the girl responded affectionately. Despite their different perspectives, they were able to avoid any major conflicts. It's likely that Stacy would have still left with her boyfriend if it weren't for their fateful last walk together. On that beautiful summer evening, everything seemed perfect. The sky was clear, the air was filled with the pleasant scent of subtropical foliage. Dave took Stacy's hand and led her down a shady path by the waterfront and shared with her his plans to move. "We're gonna rent an apartment first. My savings are enough for now, but as soon as we settle on a place, we'll start looking for jobs. I already have some income from my remote job, so I don't think we'll have any financial issues. I hope you won't have to work in the end because it's a man's duty to provide for his family," the guy said with a sly look at his beloved. "I trust you in this and I hope everything will work out for us. I'm just worried about my grandma, how she will be alone here," Stacy replied, holding her boyfriend's hand tightly in her small palm. "What's the problem? We'll get settled and bring her with us. I like her. You can tell she's well educated and has a good sense of humor. Despite her age, Mrs. Fields is in great shape." Stacy didn't tell her fiancé about her grandmother's opinion of him to avoid hurting his feelings. Of course, her grandma would never move in with someone she hated. The young couple were having a pleasant conversation as they walked along the waterfront when suddenly disaster struck. A loud roar echoed from the mountains above them, and the ground shook. Although this wasn't unusual as they lived in a seismically active zone, and small earthquakes occurred regularly in the area, but this time, nature seemed to have unleashed its full force, unleashing a powerful mudflow on the town with a fury. It swept away everything in its path, quickly approaching the location where the couple stood. Unfortunately, Stacy and Dave were directly in its path, and it was too late for them to escape. The road behind them was blocked by a wide crevice, and ahead of them was a raging river. Before they could even blink, they were swept away by the mudflow directly into the river. As the hands of the lovers parted, they were able to scream out their love for each other before the raging current consumed them both. A week had passed, and Dave, hobbling along with the aid of a cane, made his way to the house of his beloved. In a flash flood, Dave had sustained an injury to his leg after hitting the rocky bottom of the river, but he managed to make it to the shore, where he was rescued and taken to the hospital. Despite his injury, Dave was determined to see his life partner, and as soon as he was able, he rushed to Stacy's home. However, when he arrived, it was Stacy's grandma who answered the door. She was dressed in all black. Dave didn't know that she had seen him coming from the window and had dressed accordingly. "How's Stacy? Where is she?" he asked frantically. "I warned her so many times to stay away from you, but now she's gone. It's all your fault. You took her to that cursed park, and now her death is on your conscience," the old woman screamed at him. Dave's world was spinning as he heard her words. He felt guilty for the deaths of his beloved. He made his way to the park, as they had planned to go there after their hike in the mountains. Overwhelmed with shock, Dave collapsed to the floor in the stairwell, tears streaming down his face as he sobbed uncontrollably. The old woman continued to berate him before slamming the door shut, declaring that he was not even worthy to visit Stacy's grave. Unable to bear the pain, Dave left to the town that day, consumed by grief and guilt. However, what Dave did not know was that the story he had been told was not true. In fact, Stacy had survived the flood and was in the hospital not far from where Dave was. She too had been told that Dave had died and had been swept away by the mud flow. Mrs. Fields, Stacy's grandmother, had lied to them both in order to separate the couple and keep Stacy close to her. After being discharged from the hospital, Stacy was heartbroken and struggled to move on. However, she found the strength to keep going, as she now had something to live for. She was carrying Dave's child, and she decided not to tell her grandmother about it yet, as she had a weak heart. Unfortunately, Stacy never got the chance to tell her, as apparently God punished the deceitful grandmother for her cruel actions. Mrs. Fields died of a heart attack just a month after her lies had been revealed. It's clear that Stacy couldn't continue living in a town where she lost two of her closest loved ones so quickly. As a result, she, like her fiancé, decided to sell her apartment and search for happiness in foreign lands. Her goal was to eventually purchase a small, older home in the suburbs, where she could take the train to work after her daughter was old enough for the kindergarten. However, for now, she was living in a hostel while she worked. But all her troubles were yet to come. It has been 3 years since Stacy gave birth to her daughter Chelsea. During this time, she's been living in a hostel, working at a cannery for only a few months. Fortunately, the manager also took her in, allowing her to live in a room there, subsisting on benefits, savings, and small part-time jobs as a seamstress. And then, the real hard times began for the girl. It all started when she met a kind and happy woman at the church where she prayed for the repose of the soul of her fiancé and grandma. After talking with her and learning that Stacy was alone in the world and had a dream of owning her own house, the woman offered to help her acquire real estate. Unfortunately, Stacy trusted her, but it turned out that the woman was a scammer and she deceived her. Stacy's new house was registered under the woman's name. Her appeals to law enforcement agencies didn't yield any results, as they did not see the woman's actions as a crime, since Stacy did not have a receipt proving she transferred the money. As a result, the mother and daughter were left without savings and soon found themselves without housing as well, because the room they were living in was needed by the nephew of one of the factory bosses. Stacy was in despair, finding herself homeless with a child in her arms. She had nowhere to turn, except to return to the church for help from Lord. Even though she met the person who left her without a penny there, she did not lose her faith in God. And this time, He truly heard her prayers and sent this kind old man to her. Ben lived in the city in his own comfortable apartment, but in the countryside, he had an old shack that was too dilapidated and unappealing for his children. It was then that the old man offered the mother and child to live in it. Although the train ran there, it would take Stacy 2 hours to get to work, but it was the only option available to her. So they began to live with Chelsea in that remote village. Over time, Stacy continued to work at the cannery, but now in an accountant position. However, her salary was not enough to rent an apartment on the outskirts of the city, and especially since Chelsea had developed some health issues that required a significant portion of her salary. Stacy did her best to help her daughter and even took on part-time jobs as an assembly line worker, but it was still not enough. An expensive foreign drug that could help her daughter was too expensive. Chelsea was a bright and beautiful dark-skinned child, but she had to wear glasses due to her illness. Seeing how hard her mother worked, she decided to help out. Every day after school, Instead of waiting for her mother at the park nearby, she took her pipe with her and went to play at the square, hoping to collect some money. Passers-by took pity on the little beggar and often put coins and small bills in her hat. Although it wasn't a significant help to her mother, she still believed things would get better. One day, as usual, Chelsea was walking towards the square when she passed by an expensive car. She heard a muffled conversation between two men, one of whom was getting out from under the car. Chelsea followed them, but the men paid no attention to the little beggar. "Great job, Ross. Now our guy will blow up as soon as he arrived for the meeting with the client. If only he knew who Tom really is. All that time in prison finally paid off." "Alright, stop talking. He pays well and the rest is none of our concern," the accomplice replied, still glancing back at Chelsea, but seeing that she seemed to be a little beggar, he lost interest immediately. The men continued on their way, while Chelsea quickly ran to the car to wait for the owner. Dave was very surprised when a little beggar told him not to go to the meeting because some guys had put something in his car that would explode so bad that everyone in the neighborhood would remember. The businessman believed her and, just to be safe, called the police, who removed the explosive device from under the car. But the most important thing was that while they were waiting for the police, Dave managed to ask the beggar about her background. The girl told him her story and showed him a photo of her mother, which made his heart race. Even more surprised than Dave was Stacy when an unknown man called her and thanked her for saving his life. He said that after all the issues were settled with the police, he would personally take Chelsea home. Tom, along with his accomplices, was arrested the same day. Dave never would have thought that his trusted and respectable associate would do something like this for the sake of money. In the morning, terribly worried about her daughter, Stacy was amazed when a whole fleet of wedding cars drove up to her house, and her daughter triumphantly got out of the first, accompanied by Dave. Her Dave, alive and unharmed. The lovers rushed to embrace each other. Chelsea stood nearby, not knowing who this man was. "Will you marry me?" The only thing Dave could whisper. "Yes," was her reply. It was impossible to count how much the poor woman with a daughter had to endure, but happiness returned to her. Even the scammer lady, after being approached by serious people, had to return the embezzled money. Stacy did not hold a grudge against her grandma, knowing full well that she wanted her happiness. When they told the whole family about this at the grave of the old woman, the clear sky was suddenly covered by a small cloud from which a few drops of rain fell. And that was a sign, as if the grandmother was asking for forgiveness for her actions. Thank you for listening to this story. What do you think of the story and the characters? How would you handle things differently? If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing by clicking the bell notification button. It will really help us out and you won't miss new stories. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.